Paris and Detroit to commit atrocities. Given that video, question number one, is the United States doing all it can and should do to fight terrorism? I'm going to go down the row. Mr. Raczkowski, please start.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This administration is not doing enough. This administration is aiding and abetting forgetting about our allies overseas, and is in some respects bowing and trying to find out how they can create relationships between terror groups overseas. For example, Afghanistan. Let's talk about Afghanistan for one example. We've been in that war for 9 years, going on 10 almost, in a very short few months. And this administration is now starting talks, negotiating talks, between the Karzai government and the Taliban. Why did we waste so many billions of dollars? Why do we not take control of our borders from the north and south using technology? Why do we not go after illegal aliens? Why do we not protect our citizens, just like Israel does? Israel sets a perfect role model for the United States, and we don't take a look at it. Folks, as your congressman, I will encourage and stand up to this administration. I will be the check and balance to the Obama administration.
Mr. Peters, is the United States doing all it can and should do to fight terrorism?
We have to be continuously vigilant for it. Certainly this tape that came out is another example of why we have to make sure that we are at the forefront of dealing with anti-terrorism activities. We've got to make sure that our local anti-terrorist authorities have the resources that they need, the FBI, particularly when dealing with areas of domestic terrorism, that the resources need to be there. This tape is just further evidence that we are living in a very, very dangerous world. We've got to make sure that we can continue to have the resources necessary to have a strong military, to be able to project American power throughout the world, but also to know that we have the ability to protect ourselves here on our home soil. So certainly I have continually talked about making sure that we have secure borders, that our borders have to be secure. We need to put more resources in that to make it more difficult for folks to cross over into this country, and that when people are in this country, have the anti-terrorism resources for the FBI and others. So we are certainly making progress in that area, but you can never, ever let your guard down. We have to be forceful in that area. I have done that in the past and will continue to do that as a member of Congress.
And while I hope we can get the feedback problem with that mic fixed, let's go to Dr. Kofi. Doctor, is the United States doing all it can and should do to fight terrorism?
Well, as you are aware, the United States government is not doing all that it can to address it. Way back in December, you heard about what happened on the plane that was coming to Detroit, right? You heard about the terrorists who wanted to bomb this area. I tell you this, that we should be doing more. And as one of my partners indicated, technology is there. It's available to address all these kind of issues. If you look at the people of the Jewish community, if you look at people in Israel, they are one of the greatest friends of the world. When my daughter came from Ghana early in the 90s, was going to Berkshire Middle School in Birmingham. The only person that was able to relate to my daughter was a Jewish lady. I don't want to mention the name. The father works at the law council at the University of Wayne State University. But I tell you this, we have the means. We need to be in a position to actually sit down and address issues and also computerize them so that we'll be able to trigger things that will be coming into our shores. Yes, Afghan, we are not doing enough over there. We can stop all these kind of terrorism activities going on. We have the means, we have the capabilities. Israel has it too. We have to collaborate with them to address these kind of issues. I believe strongly in that.
Thank you, Dr. Mr. Campbell, is the United States doing all it can and should do to fight terrorism?
The United States government is currently doing entirely the wrong thing to be fighting terrorism. When I look at the world, I notice that most of the so-called terrorism is centered in countries sitting on top of reservoirs of petroleum. Afghanistan is a pipeline country. Iraq has petroleum Iran, and including Vietnam. I don't know how many people know that Vietnam now has a thriving state-owned oil business. Everywhere petroleum is, it seems like the U.S. military follows. What we need to do, and what I will do when I was elected to Congress, is oppose the Obama administration's policy of making war on the oil-bearing regions of the world. I will vote to cut off congressional appropriations for the war funding. I will vote to cut off funding for agencies like Blackwater to go out and kill people overseas, because we need to cut off terrorism at the source. We don't wait till terrorists are formed and then try to fight them. We need to prevent them from ever occurring. And the way to do that is by not sending American forces in to terrorize the Middle East. If we had an overwhelming number of Afghani troops staffing checkpoints in the streets of Oakland County, we would become terrorists too. We would be fighting every opportunity we had the Afghani occupiers. Well, that's what the situation is. We withdraw from the Middle East, we stop forming terrorists, and the terrorism threat largely evaporates.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Okay. By the time the next session of Congress opens, the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks may be moving forward, remain stalled, or have broken down. What should the role be of the United States in each scenario? Mr. Peters, you're first.
The Middle East peace is of utmost importance, not just for the entire world, but certainly for the Palestinian people and the Israelis. The United States' role has to be to make sure that those parties come to the table. Ultimately, in order to get that peace, those parties have to come to that agreement together. I think it is very clear, though, when those negotiations, as they go forward, those negotiations have to be without any preconditions. Although I will say there is one precondition that I think the parties have to agree on, and that is that a Jewish state of Israel does have a right to exist. To me, it is outrageous that you have parties come to the table and say that does not happen. The state has that right to exist. And also when it comes to what's happened with the settlements, I will say that the Israeli government has moved forward and has actually put a moratorium on those settlements for a long time. I'm questioning whether or not Palestinian Authority and Palestinians have honored that commitment that the Israelis have made. I will say that I do agree that there should be natural and organic growth in settlements. We should allow that. If people are going to want to live next to their grandparents or have families, so that kind of growth is not part of any kind of settlement moratorium. Certainly, Netanyahu and others have really, Prime Minister Netanyahu and others have stepped forward and made a good faith effort on that. It should be recognized. So the United States' role is to bring those parties to the table without preconditions, with the exception that Israel has a right to exist, and to get those talks to move forward.
Okay, I think my partner already said it perfectly. The Israeli people need to exist. So do we know that the Palestinians also need to exist. But I believe strongly that the government is doing every effort to make sure that the two parties come together to address these issues. I know that Hillary Clinton has been doing very well. The Prime Minister of both countries have been doing very well. And there have been talks at the White House to address these kind of things. Again, what do we say? We have to collaborate. They have to collaborate, come to consensus on how these things should be addressed. And that is the way we can have a peaceful region in that area, peaceful area in that region, as well as peaceful, what we call countries all over the world. So we are doing the right thing, but we have got to move on. We've got to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kuofle. Mr. Campbell, your thoughts.
I would certainly like to see successful peace talks between Israel and Palestine. I'd certainly like to see some sort of a peaceful settlement emerge. But I'm running for the United States Congress, the legislative branch. International treaties are the duty of the executive branch and the State Department, and I'm not running for the State Department. As I said before, I would vote to cut off funding for American military adventures in the Middle East.